All right. Good morning, everyone. So glad to have you here, especially if you've been with us all morning. Thanks for sticking with us. The content has been amazing, and we'll remind you that this whole summit is being recorded. So if you have missed anything so far, we'll be sending that out after the conference. But I just want to welcome you. My name is Christa Thorpe, and I'm a community development officer working on broadband at the Island Institute. And I'm so grateful that you've joined us here for this panel discussion, Why Social Justice Requires Broadband. As you see from the title, we're not here to just talk about equity as an afterthought to broadband, but rather to center social justice as the primary impetus for bringing reliable, affordable, high-speed internet to all Mainers. Before I invite our excellent panelists to introduce themselves and start this discussion, just some quick housekeeping. We are in Zoom meeting mode, so we are going to be spotlighting all of our panelists, and Reed, you can go ahead and do that, bring us in. But we're doing that in order for you to be able to see who else is here, to have a sense that we are in a room together since we can't physically be. But we will ask everyone to stay on mute so that we can hear the speakers well. And we'll welcome you all to use the chat for your questions and comments. Reed Plimpton from Northeast Telehealth Resource Center will be collecting those questions, and we'll have time for them at a Q&A toward the end of the session. So to begin, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and their organization or the work that they're representing today. And we'll begin with Kerem.
Hello, thanks Christa for having me as part of the conversation, and hello to everybody on the panel. Very, very kind of you to participate. I'm Kerem, I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer of GWI. We are a B Corp internet service provider to all of Maine, the only B Corp telecommunications carrier in the United States, and hopefully not the last one either. So we want to carry the torch forward. In terms of social justice and equality, we believe internet is a human right. So let's begin from there.
Perfect. Marisa.
Hi, Christa, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for having us on the panel today. And for everyone that organized this event. So my name is Marisa Weil. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Vice President of Development and Community Engagement at Maine Family Planning. Maine Family Planning is a 501c3 organization established in 1971, and our mission is to expand high quality, affordable sexual and reproductive health care to all Mainers, comprehensive sexuality education, and the right to control our reproductive lives.
Thank you, Marisa. Preston.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Preston Thomas. I'm with Forward Directions Development Corporation. Our mission is to improve the social and economic conditions of the Native American tribes in Maine, and we do that by education, investments in affordable housing, travel business ventures, and Native entrepreneurship.
Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to dive right into the big question. In a nutshell, from your perspective and from where you sit, why is broadband a social justice issue? And let's go backwards this time. Let's start off with Preston.
You know, it's interesting that I was put on this panel to talk about this because, you know, traditionally, Native American tribes have been kind of put to the side and forgotten, basically. And a lot of times when there's been government initiatives, especially by the federal government, a lot of times tribes are basically let to do what they can to take on those initiatives. And so there has been this lack of support from states, cities, towns, the government, federal government, in working with the tribes and implementing some of those programs, initiatives. And we're talking about things like infrastructure, health-related, social, education. And of course now, you know, broadband is a big thing now because of what COVID did to us. And I think everybody's on the same page in relation to that. So that's been a big issue for tribes. And I think it's not only that, but, you know, tribes are mostly located in remote locations. And Maine is most of the communities are in remote locations. So I think a lot of the communities in towns in Maine have a lot of things in common with the tribes in Maine as well, because we're all located in remote locations. So that kind of puts, communities in remote locations kind of out of mind, out of sight, so to speak. There's also been issues with tribes not having the experience and the expertise with people that they have employed or tribal members to do like broadband. And I think a lot of small towns have the same problem as well, because, there's talk about yesterday where a lot of the people that want broadband in their communities have to find people with the expertise as well. And there's not very many people that have a lot of knowledge in broadband. And, I'm no exception. I have limited knowledge, with broadband, but I feel very passionate that I believe that tribes in Maine should have access to it. And that's why I'm involved with the broadband initiative for the tribes in the state of Maine. Another thing that I see tribes having problems with is they have other priorities that they rather work on than broadband. Broadband is like not on the top of their 10 list of things that they need to work on and provide or make available to their tribal members. I know one community in the state, one tribal community in the state that has issues with drinking water. They don't have quality water they can even bathe in. So that's like a priority for them over broadband. They understand that, their students need to go to school and they need to do that by accessing broadband to learn about, what the teacher is teaching for that day. But, if you don't have drinking water, I mean, that's a big issue over going to school, or doing your business or whatever trouble government activity you have to get done. So there are some things like those tribes have to decide what is a priority for them to work on. So broadband hasn't been really a priority, but they know that it's something out there that they need to work on, but due to some of the limitations they have in terms of bandwidth is a big issue, as well as other things and resources. But we know that NTIA made $1 billion available to tribes just last round. And now we're hearing that the federal government, through the new approval by Biden, that there's going to be $2 billion available for broadband for Indian country. So, which is good to hear. And I want to see that the tribes here in Maine can access to that. And I'm very grateful that Connect Maine and other organizations in the state, including the state, is now more willing and involved to work with the tribes in the state to make that available to them. So with that, I'm going to start right there, and I'll.
Yeah, you've given us so much to come back to, especially around some of those barriers. But what I hear you saying is that broadband is a resource, and like any resource, whether that's the more primary resources, yes, we need water and food before we can think of our other needs. But you're kind of drawing that picture for us of Maine's current landscape of haves and have-nots when it comes to certain resources, including broadband. So yeah, let's pass this on to Marisa. What connection from where you sit, big connections between broadband and social justice?
Thank you. And thank you, Preston. It's so important to hear your perspective. I think for me, as a social justice issue, when we're thinking about broadband, I mean, I'm here representing Maine Family Planning. And so I kind of place everything within the framework of reproductive justice. And that's something that we really try to do at Maine Family Planning. So for those who are not familiar with the concept of reproductive justice, this is a social justice framework that was developed by women of African descent in the 1990s. That's what they call themselves. And the tenets of reproductive justice are the right to have children, not have children, and raise the families that we do have in safe and sustainable communities. And so today, access to broadband is really an issue of community safety and sustainability in our mind. I think a lack of broadband access exacerbates the pre-existing burdens of underserved communities by impacting services that increasingly depend on the internet. And I think we saw during the pandemic that this really came out in education and healthcare. And MFP works in both of those areas. So I think the pandemic has really shown us beyond a shadow of a doubt the extent to which we're reliant on internet access to be able to participate equitably in those systems.
Thank you. And we'll definitely make sure to spend some time focused on telehealth today as really a key aspect of this conversation. Krem, how do broadband and social justice connect?
Well, first I want to thank Marissa and Preston, because I think their voices are incredibly important here. Social justice is about equality, and equality is about participatory democracy, and participatory democracy is about knitting the society together to be one. In some ways, broadband is a foundational element of civilization, right? So if it is a foundational element of civilization, it has to be accessible to all, affordable to all. And to some large extent, you can sort of take that trajectory and say, it is possibly a contributor to closing the economic divide, which is rampant, not just here in our country, but everywhere else. So it holds the potential, it holds the promise of at least providing some sort of a normalization of opportunity that's available to all. So you can, whether it's jobs or education or telehealth, or even knowing what your government is doing, all of those things require an infrastructure that's available to all. And we can have different definitions of what social justice is, but at the end of the day, it's equality. It's everybody having a voice at the same table. And traditionally, infrastructure has been one besotten by redlining, it going to only places where people have the money to do so, and everybody else, you're on your own. Well, at least we have a once in a generational opportunity here to try to redress that in a way that is sustainable for the next several generations. So I think in that sense, isn't that also social justice, where you're trying to do something so that your kids and their kids and their kids are at least proud of you? So, I tend to have, just like what Preston and Marissa come on, it's good to have a 360-degree holistic view of this. This is not just text, it's not bits and bytes. It's not just being able to, binge on Netflix and HBO Max and being a gamer. That's well and beyond that. So to me, it's part and parcel of life. Indeed, life for everybody.
Great, and you're referencing that once in generation opportunity around the funding, and we'll come back to that. But to follow up, Karem, what are some challenges or barriers that when you describe the people, the redlining, right, the people that have been left behind in this whole broadband equation so far, and now maybe we have the opportunity to really talk about expanding broadband, what are the challenges or barriers that you've seen to bringing that infrastructure to those communities?
I think it's probably three axes. One is of intent. The intent has always been sort of diffused, right? Only so many people are doing it, or the private sector is trying to do it, or not trying to do it. But now it's one of intent, where the municipalities, the communities, the towns, they can all get together. And getting together is a challenge. In Maine, we are driven culturally by our home rule philosophy. It will not work in this situation. You have to band together, you have to aggregate together so that your project or projects can have a critical mass to it. There's a lot of money coming in, but that lot of money wants to be efficient. It doesn't want to fund, it doesn't want to fund 250 projects at $1 million each. It wants to fund 50 projects at X $1 million each. So I think that aggregation is a challenge for the state of Maine. The state of Maine has this attitude of, you're not from here, which ends up having ripple effects. The not from here we need to get rid of, because this infrastructure is going to allow not just us as a society over here to operate, but also be able to attract other people from other places to come over here. That's a cultural challenge. I mean, there are obviously technological and operational challenges, right? So how can you make it affordable enough to get to those not so dense places, or the places which are far flung or off the grid? Geographically, Maine is immense. It's a very large state with only 1.3 million people in it. So you have to be resilient and reliant and redundant in whatever you design. The other challenge is making sure the money is, channeled appropriately, well, with expertise, the policies, rule, eligibility, the workflow, all be nailed down tight and clear. So that expertise has to descend and sort of go everywhere. That's a challenge. This is not something that Maine has done before at this scale, right? So that's one part of it. Last but not least in the challenges is to be really clear with what we want to do, right? So it's not like we have time to pontificate for another 10 years and come up with policy papers, right? So we have to move because the world is moving. So, we have to really get together. The money is there. The money's not going to be able to pay for all of it. So the challenge is, how do you leverage that money so they can get other monies, whether it's municipal revenue bonds, it's the private sector, or other grants. You have to sort of stitch things together, which requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of trust. And I would urge municipalities and communities to find those trust verification partners and really put their heads down and just say, let's go. I don't think fear should be the order of the day. It should be, being epic and getting this done. This is not going to ever happen again, at least in my lifetime, something like this. And so I think it's our moral, ethical, and financial obligation that we really don't screw it up. So that's a challenge. Not screwing up is a massive challenge.
Preston, you started speaking to this same question as well, around all those pieces that Karan just described of the technical pieces needing to come together in order to be able to take advantage of funding and expand broadband. You mentioned the lack of capacity as a challenge in Indigenous communities in Maine. Could you speak a little bit more to that? And that just from where you're sitting right now, what could maybe help overcome those challenges of bringing broadband to Indigenous communities?
The challenges we had this past year with trying to get tribes to submit their application for the NTIA broadband funding was pretty evident that they did not have the people to be involved in the planning committees that we had. And it was also hard for them to make that commitment to work with us and others to work on submitting their applications. So in regards to broadband, their limited broadband, that was a limitation. So it's not only that, it's across the board. There's a lot of things going on with ARPA, and I think tribes have to decide going back to what is our priority? What do we really need to, what kind of funding do we really need to access for our tribal members? What is it that they really need? So they have to, based on their limited resources, they have to decide where they want to put, all their efforts to do that.
And I imagine that having some clearer pictures of actually how broadband can increase opportunities and become this driving force for success and growth and change in a community could be the impetus for helping people realize that the time is worth, the time and effort are worth it. So I think Marisa can probably help draw our attention to some of the opportunities or the examples that you've seen, whether at an individual level or in communities throughout Maine, where broadband has actually opened doors to new opportunities for success or just access.
Well, thanks, Christa. And I love that you used the term open doors, because actually we have an open door gender affirming healthcare program that focuses on transgender healthcare, LGBTQ healthcare, And that is definitely one area where the expansion in telehealth has truly been, I would say, life-changing for people accessing this kind of care. I'm not sure if people are aware. I assume most people are, but I don't like to make assumptions. So trans people particularly are subject to harassment frequently, violence frequently. Tomorrow is actually the Trans Day of Remembrance, when we think of all the trans lives that have been lost, and commit ourselves to action, ideally. And so being able to access care via telehealth, hormonal replacement therapy, is a safety mechanism for a lot of these patients, that it makes them able to access care from a safe place, from home, and not have to subject themselves to potential harm, really. So that's been one area where we've really seen patient preference driving towards using telehealth versus in-person clinics frequently. Of course, for Maine Family Planning, another area where we see telehealth making a big impact in patient lives and experience is in accessing abortion care. And so, I would say in the pandemic, there have been some other regulatory changes and updates that have really expanded the ability for patients to access abortion care via telehealth. But that's definitely an area where that's the patient preference. If you can access early abortion care via telehealth with medication abortion, that's the way that patients frequently prefer to access it. And it's not a big question why. You don't have to deal with protesters. You can deal with this issue on your own time in the privacy and safety of your own home, observing your own rituals and having your own care providers with you, whether that's friends, family, or Netflix and as Karen said. So those are two areas that I really wanted to kind of highlight where patients have been benefiting tremendously from access to telehealth, and that to have that ability, you really need high-speed broadband internet access.
And before we move on from this, either Kerem or Preston, do you have any examples you could add of the opportunities that broadband opens up at an individual or community level?
I'll give you. I can give you two examples, really quick ones. The inbound recent Afghan refugees, for example, that are coming to the state of Maine. A handful of them actually in Portland. They are at a place where there's really no internet infrastructure. In Portland, let's just think about it. Now, why do these refugees need that? Why do my immigrant brothers and sisters need this? Well, because they need to be able to talk to their families back there. And that really resonates with me because, I'm part and parcel of that community, but they can't do it. They need the internet. So they have the internet, they have Wi-Fi. With the Wi-Fi, they can get on WhatsApp. With WhatsApp from their phones, they can then talk to their family members. This is really real and visceral. This is not some abject, disparate, theoretical concept. They need to talk to people. And right now they can't. So there's a community of us trying to make sure that we can get them the internet access tomorrow, now, and at least so they can talk to their family members. That's one example. The other example is, look at the island of Islesboro. Everybody there has a gigabit by gigabit service. Kids can do their homework and joyfully so while doing cartwheels. You have 8 families that moved from somewhere else, but now are part and parcel of the Maine community, Maine society, over there, joyfully, younger families, to an island because they have a gigabit by gigabit infrastructure. They can do business. The fishermen can do whatever they want on a global economy. You have people coming over there and saying, this is where I want to live and spend the rest of my life because I can connect to the rest of the world. These are really tangible, visceral, advantages of having world-class internet service providers there. So 2 examples immediately.
Really appreciate examples that give me like a concrete image in my mind, like picturing our new Afghan Mainers here in Portland. Preston, do you have anything to add as far as you are starting to work with Wabanaki communities on the opportunities that broadband may be able to provide specifically to tribal folks?
I think that one thing that I see that is going to be beneficial to everyone, especially in the remote locations, is that I think cities and counties and communities that border reservations need to work with the tribes and not treat them like strangers. You know, I mean, come on, you guys have been neighbors for a long time. And, you know, let's get over whatever issues we've had in the past, and you know, let's all work together and make this work. Because if we don't, it's always going to be a difficult challenge for us. So I think what's going on now and what I see, and not only that would be nice to see, but the federal government is finally sitting with the tribes and doing consultations, sessions with them on some of the initiatives that they're doing nationally. And to see that, you know, Connect Maine doing activities like this, that where they're including tribes to be involved in the planning processes and these initiatives. So I think seeing that and that growing and developing is going to be very important.
I have some specific questions related to the funding, and I think it kind of ties in a question that Maggie from Maine Community Foundation put in the chat. But so I'll word it like hers, and then come back to some of the more specific funding questions. But Maggie asked, when you think about underserved populations and broadband access, what are your wish lists? What's one big idea you would have us all focus on if you could? Help us think big. So I hear both Preston and Kerem pointing to this challenge that we have of working with our neighbors, you know, just across community lines. So I don't know if related to that, or Marisa, if you have any other kind of big ideas that are really focused on, you know, crossing over those lines to the underserved communities. Any thoughts for Maggie and the rest of our group?
I think one of the things that I want to mention is that in the past, like I said, the origin was that tribes have never had anybody to work with. Like the cities and towns in America, the state's always there. It's like their big brother that's always looking out for the smaller communities in their states. But for tribes on the reservation, they're alone. They don't have anybody like a big brother to rely on. But I think, you know, in terms of making this work, the states needed to work more with the tribes directly. And our concern when NTIA made money available for broadband, it was like, why can't the NTIA just give the money to the state and the state can work with the tribes? And I was like, why are they going directly to the tribes? Because as we know, with limited resources that the tribes have, it was going to be impossible to make that happen. And that's what we have seen. And we're going to continue to see that unless we can bring some of the resources to the tribes like we did by getting Connect Maine to help us with providing a telecommunications company to work with the tribe to help them with their application. That was the only way it could work. It could work because the tribes don't have the expertise. They don't have the manpower to do the application. So it would be nice to have resources where we can maybe have a quasi person that can work with the tribe. And, I mean, there's only 4 tribes, well, 5 technically in the state, and there's not very many, you know? So anyway, that's what I have to add.
Thanks, Preston. And could just for our viewers and listeners, would you just explain a little bit more maybe take this opportunity to explain how 4 Directions works with those tribes, and specifically a little bit more just about the structure. I know that this topic of broadband deployment and using federal funds often brings up the question of those funds going to reservations versus to tribal members who live off reservation. So if you could help us understand that landscape a little bit more, that could help inform this next conversation about just the funding coming in and how it could be best deployed.
You know, I think one of the things that we've seen on an application we were help assist was that the tribe that applied for the NTIA funding was only able to provide the funding to provide support to the tribal members that lived on the reservation. So tribal members that live off the reservation weren't going to be able to receive that support or access to the funding that the tribe was going to get. So it was limited based to the reservation and their location on the reservation.
It's helpful for communities to keep in mind as they're doing their comprehensive processes of figuring out who in their community, who is in their community, and who doesn't currently have access. So turning our attention to, as Karim described it, this once in a lifetime opportunity, once in a generation opportunity, the unprecedented public funding for broadband and digital inclusion, it's really addressing both, coming to Maine through the bipartisan infrastructure bill. What kinds of investments do you believe will lead to social justice outcomes? So kind of narrowing in on that a bit, and Marisa, you might have some thoughts around telehealth and both investments and policy changes potentially needed there. But again, you guys are doing great at just keeping this organic. So I'll toss it out to Karim, Marisa, anyone on what kind of investments we think would be most strategic.
Well, I'd love to just piggyback for a moment off of the point that Preston brought up about, folks not living on the reservation, not necessarily having access to that. And as someone who works in philanthropy and fundraising, I just kind of have to take a moment to shout out that from a funding perspective, I'm always advocating for greater flexibility and fluidity in funding opportunities. We're always grateful for them, and this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, absolutely. But in my experience in philanthropy, sometimes funding can disincentivize experimentation because the guidelines are usually very narrow and specific, and it foments kind of a fear of failure on the part of the people that are receiving the funds. And there can be a lack of communication between funders and fundees and some kind of obstacles there. So I just wanted to take a moment to shout that out. And I think that there are some creative ways that we can work around that. And a lot of funders are starting to think about things more flexibly. Another one, when we're talking about human capacity too, is that, a lot of these towns, municipalities, maybe there's a select board, part-time people, that a lot of the times you need investment in human beings to really go out there to these communities, to these towns on not a short-term, but kind of a long-term relationship building basis, and really provide hands-on support. But from the healthcare perspective, particularly when we're talking about getting consumers broadband access on the consumer side, I do want to bring up that I think that from the healthcare perspective, at least speaking from Maine Family Planning, I think the providers ourselves, we also need access to funds to kind of grow our online accessibility in terms of what we are able to offer to patients. And there are not necessarily an abundance of funding streams available for things like that. So I'm thinking about things like, real-time interpretation and the ability to have that, and accessibility features like, closed captions and things like that, and just ways that we need to be able to bring up our telehealth infrastructure that, again, there's just not an abundance of funding sources for that at this time.
From my perspective, I just love what Marisa said. From my perspective, the investments are one of anchored by public benefit, right? So this is something that has immutable public benefit on a generational scale. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that there'll be investment actually in management of expectations. This is a large endeavor. This is sort of like a mini moonshot, not too dissimilar, the Apollo program, where we have to manage not just our expectations, but essentially society's expectations. This is hard, tough to do, takes time, requires this unique combination of expertise, intent, community engagement, consumer rights, tech. So I think we're going to learn better how to manage each other's expectations, because this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. This will happen over 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years. So I think that's a good thing, because when you manage expectations, you tend then want to deal with facts, with information that is real, tangible, understandable. And coming back to what Preston was saying, there are lots of nuances with creating this, with standing up this infrastructure. It is all our obligation to make sure that the expertise that is there actually translates down to the community level, because the decisions that we're going to make need to be made by everybody around the table. It's not just one person, one company, one entity. It has to be everybody, which means all that nuance, all that expertise has to, get normalized, which comes back to Marissa's point is, how do you get that level of engagement? And I know that the Maine Broadband Coalition and Connect Maine have been thinking about, in fact, Maine Community Foundation too, have been thinking about having these community core like engagers that would go out into the communities and essentially hold their hands and say, hold my hand, and we're going to try to figure this thing out together. And that those community engagement core would be the recipient of knowledge based on multiplicity of sources, synthesize it, absorb it, and then distribute it. Because there's 500 plus municipalities in the state of Maine. So there's a lot of knowledge and education to disperse. And we have to be intentional about doing that and say we are open to doing that. And we're not going to be in the silo, this is mine, this is yours kind of stuff, because that will not work. That will essentially fray this whole program to the pieces. There's a reason why we ended up going to the moon, because we said, well, those 3 people are going to represent all our knowledge and learning base, and we're going to put 500,000 engineers to work to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing here. Same idea. So I don't think we can be possessive about information or expertise. I think we have to get in the mode of giving, gifting, and receiving. I think those are investments. Those are really good investments.
Yeah, really, really good, really hard, really necessary.
Yeah.
Going along with that, Marissa, you started talking about the big ideas and the ways that funding could help increase access to, again, populations who've traditionally been left behind when it comes to the connectivity and specifically telehealth. And in order to prepare maybe for that funding coming down in the hope that it will be flexible, what are some community level partnerships or statewide partnerships and collaborations that you feel could help be leveraged to increase the access to telehealth and education?
Yeah, thanks. I'd point out to one of our programs where we worked with a lot of different community providers. So our Reproductive Empowerment Project focused on people who use drugs and people who are experiencing substance use disorder. And in that project, our model was to meet people where they were at at the places where they are receiving services. So we might have a medical assistant or a rep outreach coordinator at an intimate partner violence or a domestic violence program, or at a food shelter, or at a recovery community. And so I think, as Karen was saying, these kind of working together options, I think we need to think about more broadly who our potential partners are in this work. I do want to just kind of shout out that I think we need to be thinking also about the divide between how people are accessing broadband. Are they accessing it from home? Are they accessing it from mobile? Because that's a really important distinction. And where a lot of young people and low income people, and especially there's like I think it's 25% of Latinx people are accessing broadband by their phone. And so really thinking about investments in hardware, do people have the equipment that they need? And thinking about programs like the Lifeline program, which provides cell phones to low-income people. But that's only, I think, a 4.5 monthly gigabyte, and a high-quality telehealth visit is going to take 2 gigs of that, just 1 hour of a high-quality video telehealth visit. So thinking about how we can, think about existing policies. And while broadband is really important, as Preston was pointing out, it's not everybody's priority. And so I think we need to meet people where they're at. And there's one issue for us that's coming up in that right now under the pandemic, people can access telehealth visits via the phone. And that's something that is actually temporary for the moment. But I think we need to think about expanding things like that and making them permanent so that, we are working towards a full adoption, but we know we're not there yet. So how are we going to build bridges for people, that are going to get them from where we are now to where we would like to be without people kind of falling off the map?
I'd like to remind everyone, feel free to drop questions in the chat and or comments. I know that we have Susan Corbett here, and what Marisa was just talking about, the issue of access to devices as part of that. Broadband access isn't just about the connection that's coming into your home. It's also about what device you can afford to use. And we do have the National Digital Equity Center based right here in Maine with some programs. Karem, also, I got excited when you started talking about the possibilities that we have through some of the programs being rolled out or planned, both with the Maine Broadband Coalition and the newly formed Maine Connectivity Authority, this idea of that technical capacity, human capacity coming to regional efforts and to communities. And it would just be, now's a good chance to remind us all that this is just the first of hopefully lots of conversations over the next months as those programs are developed, that anybody who's here today listening or talking should realize that we have the ability right now to keep pushing on the issue of social justice, keeping that at the center of actually how these programs get developed. And so, yeah, I'd like to think about the just investments a little bit more and say that you're talking to the Maine Connectivity Authority. What would you encourage this new statewide body to, where would you encourage them to focus invested dollars?
Yeah, so what I would do is so there's a couple of really cool things with this infrastructure bill. So for example, there is a program called Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. GWI is one of a handful of ISPs that apply for it. Household, and a qualifying household as determined by the feds would get up to $50 of their internet bill paid for by the feds, which is massive, right? So, a decent internet service provider, one that has moral, ethical, and financial obligations to the world at large, to themselves and to the community, would be able to provide world-class service that it provides to everybody else, but it would be subsidized by a qualified household. So, sidebar note, when it comes to social justice, again, I point to equality, right? Services should not be provided to low-income neighborhoods or BIPOC communities or other disenfranchised communities at a lesser level, at a lesser price. That's not equality. It should be the same thing for everyone. And if we are, as a human society, beholden to certain, social contracts, we should be able to help those communities. So that's what the EBP does at the $50 level. But on the recently signed infrastructure bill, that is actually going to get extended with what's called the Affordable Connectivity Program. So that EBP program, which was a stopgap coming in from the ARPA funds, is now going to get extended possibly for the next decade, which means as part of this program, qualifying households will also get a device. So it's not just enough. You and I and Marissa, and I'm pretty sure Preston, we have computers, we have things, we can log on, log off, we know what to do, how to do. That's not necessarily true for low-income BIPOC immigrant communities, right? So now they will have an opportunity to actually get a device and get their service subsidized at a level which now makes it accessible. Oh, that's really cool. I mean, just think about it. That's a tectonic shift, right? So we're going from the world of I will just have it for myself to saying I'm going to help everybody get it. So I think that should be celebrated. The other thing is, there are communities all around us and entities around us that are the nodal points of information, to these communities. So for example, the Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center, Prosperity Maine, Maine Immigrant Human Rights Coalition. There's over 20 to 25 really well-connected, well-funded, well-embedded in these communities that do all this work. My message to the Maine Connector Authority, reach out to them, have a conversation. It shouldn't be the same 7 people around the same table talking all the time. Go out in a little bus and visit 500, 600, 700 entities and get to know. Because in the knowing is empowerment, and the empowerment is then deployable action. And they're going to hear stories that they have never heard before. So I think that brings it very real to the impact that this money is going to have, right? $50 a month with a connected device. I mean, that's a tectonic change for somebody that couldn't do their homework and they were trying to do it on this crappy little flip phone. Think about it. So it's huge. So that's what I would tell them. Get out, go out, travel, put on some miles.
Right. Book your miles. Preston, can you add to this? We know that the, and again, Reed has been posting some of these resources in the chat. So that emergency broadband benefit up to $50 for a household is up to $75 for tribal members. And again, you referenced this a little bit earlier, but there's funding available, maybe building off of some of what Marisa was talking about. What partnerships, specific partnerships or collaborations do you see an opportunity for between the tribal communities in Maine and other statewide or community-based organizations working on broadband deployment? And I know you also come at this from a small business support perspective. So any additional thoughts on partnerships or collaborations to really help increase the awareness even of these opportunities?
I was thinking what Corinne just mentioned about the affordability that brings quality to everyone. It's hard when you're making minimum wage, and you got to put food on the table for your kids. You got to pay for a place to live, gas to pay for your car to take it to work. So the $50 can go a long way for people that don't have or don't make that much money to support their family. And I think it's very important that digital equity, the new infrastructure money that's going to come down that's going to be available, I think it's going to be very helpful for tribes to access. But I think some of the things that Maggie was referring to is that we need to find a way to kind of like find a mentor or someone that the tribes can work with and make sure the tribes are involved and are active in some of these things, because even like just knowing that the new infrastructure bill includes this and that kind of funding that you need to think about. And that's kind of what we do here as an organization, is in regards to housing and economic development for the tribes, or business development. We try to keep the tribes informed, but that's part of our mission, because those are things that we feel are important for the tribes to know. So our executive directors always in contact with the chiefs and let them know these are things you need to be considering or think about, or things to consider that are coming up, and maybe include as part of your planning processes, and talk about with your tribal members and your tribal leadership. So it's the same thing that brought the way that broadband needs to work the same way, where we need to get the tribes a little bit more involved. I mean, we understand that they have limitations in terms of bandwidth, but if we can find, like I said, a mentor, someone that can work with them, I think can be beneficial to them to get the things that need to get done in regards to broadband.
Thank you, Preston. I like Maggie's suggestion here in the chat that we should crowdsource a list of organizations or people for the Connectivity Authority to meet and engage with, for Kerem's idea of this epic Maine traveling show. And so I'm wondering if people here, the participants in the audience, if everybody could just drop at least one organization or person in the chat for us to start that list. Why not, right? We're all here because we see value in this topic, and that we're probably all here because we're thinking about whether it's a specific person or organization or underrepresented community in Maine. We can probably come up with a list of those who are working with them. I know that. Good, thank you. Start feeding those in. And with the last few minutes that we have, keeping in mind that we do have this this diverse audience here of policymakers, community members, educators, nonprofit representatives, Kerem, Marisa, Preston, one takeaway that you would like our audience to leave today with, something that maybe everybody can walk out and do as a next step on this topic. Just the floor is yours, and what would you like folks to take away?
Well, I don't think anybody in this room, this virtual room or space, does this, but I would always say, like, we can't compartmentalize everything. So as Preston was just saying, we can't talk about broadband access without talking about the affordable housing crisis and insufficient wages compared with the cost of living, the escalating costs of healthcare and education. It's all related. And so that's not to say that we need to give equal attention to every cause, because obviously that's not possible and it's not pragmatic for our own skill sets. But a dear friend of mine, Janet Benson, the widow of our late medical director, Rusty Young, said to me recently, there's so much injustice in the world, just pick a few things and do them well. And I think that's exactly right. But we do need to always keep in the back of our mind the intersectionality of all these issues and work together as much as possible. And I think Mainers are smart and resilient and kind, and I know we'll be able to work together to create systems and policies that are inclusive and forward-thinking. And I would also just end on that and saying that we should all support the movement for tribal sovereignty.
I would say lean in, put a shoulder in. It's hard work, but lean in and just put your voice and bang the drum. It's that moment, make sure you're heard. Make sure you scream and you bang that drum. So if there's a public service announcement, statewide that we should do, could do, would do, then this is the time to do it. And I would urge the Maine Connectivity Authority and all that stuff. Public service announcement, why we need to bang the drum, get everybody involved.
Preston, any thoughts?
I think, if anything else, I think the one thing that is important is to reach out to your neighbors, and let's all work together. That's the only way we can be able to overcome this challenge that we're faced with right now, because we're all suffering, and unfortunately, COVID's made it. It's made it so big that now it's like everybody is on the equal level playing field, and in order to avoid that and overcome that, we all have to work together.
Thank you. I think this morning, if anyone was with us during the welcome remarks and the keynote, there is maybe for the first time a growing opposition, right, to public investment in broadband. And I think that this panel right here and this conversation represents maybe one of the first responses that we can have to that opposition of folks who feel that this is a private issue, this is a customer landscape, this is not something that we need the government to get involved with. I think that this conversation kind of speaks for itself in leading the charge against that. And yeah, with that, I would just like to thank Kerem and Preston and Marisa and everyone who was here for this panel today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for helping us begin in that crowdsourced list. And I'm just going to be closing us out, but we'll do our silent Zoom clap for the panelists. Thank you. So here we are, wrapping up 15 minutes from noon on Friday. And we would like to remind you all that this whole conference has been recorded. So anything that you missed, you'll be able to catch up with. We hope that you learned something that you can take back to your community, region, or organization. And over the course of the summit, which started yesterday afternoon and is wrapping up right now, we asked you to listen, to engage, and to digest a great deal of information. So again, all the recordings will be posted and you can revisit them. But along with that, we are going to be asking for your feedback and following up with you in 2 different ways. So first, by a survey. Please do keep your eyes out for an email with a survey link asking you more about what you enjoyed, what you would have liked to see more of over the last couple days. And that will help us focus not only on future full state summits, but specific follow-up convenings on each of the issues that were covered during this summit. We want to keep the information flowing. The second way, other than a survey, is we are excited about the future of the Maine Broadband Coalition. The Maine Broadband Coalition that put on this summit has grown over the last 2 years. And with that comes some great opportunities. And if we could see everyone here back here on December 15th, Wednesday, there's an open forum about the future of the coalition, and we'll be sending follow-up info to everyone who registered for this conference about that December 15th meeting. So until then, be thinking about how the Maine Broadband Coalition could focus our programming, what policy areas we should lean in on, and how we can continue to engage across a diverse array of leaders in Maine. And you can bet that we'll take our list that we started today, we'll hand that right on to that conversation. Look forward to seeing you December 15th. And we'd like to thank again our sponsors. As Andrew and others have said today, this was just really an incredible lineup of supporters, private, public, nonprofit, who came together to make this summit possible. The support for broadband in Maine is growing. Our sponsors have ensured that we have the ability to grow and shape an informative summit to match the changing connectivity landscape here. So a special thank you. If you were all able to hear our keynote today by Susan Crawford, special thanks to her, to Governor Mills and Senator King for their contributions as well. And finally, thank you all for joining us. We look forward to more virtual and in-person opportunities to engage and learn together in this upcoming year. And happy weekend. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your Friday. And with that, we'll close out. Bye.